Hi, I'm Vanita, and I am here with Steve Jaffe. Layoffs follow a grief like journey, and today's guest, Steve, knows that journey all too well. After being laid off 4 times throughout his career, he's turned his experience into a book called The Layoff Journey, a guide for anyone trying to move from the why me to what's next. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, at the time of this recording, it is Halloween, and this week has been a rough one for layoff announcements. It's been a scary week for thousands of people. And Steve, when I hear layoff announcements, it brings me right back to my own experience.
Mhm.
Last year, I was laid off after 10 years at being at a company that I loved. It's always like a form of PTSD for me. I'm wondering if you share similar feelings when you hear about layoff announcements.
Yeah, absolutely. Empathy all the way around. When I heard about those announcements, gosh, there's just so many of them, so many people impacted. And it's such a difficult time to be on the job market trying to find a job. But,
Mhm.
we're right around the corner from the holidays. There's no good time to get laid off. But when you get laid off right before the holidays, it stings even worse.
It's never a good time, but there's always something about the holidays. It's like, why does it always have to be around the holidays? So you had 4 layoffs in
Yeah,
your career. The most recent one being in 2023.
right.
Can you talk about your first one, your feelings, the mindset you were in, how you reacted versus the most recent one and how that was different?
Absolutely. I love that question because that sets up kind of the story arc in the book
Yep.
and my motivation, honestly, for writing the book. So I'll set the stage for you. It was spring of 2001, and I was working in San Francisco in an advertising agency on a great account. Things were going very well in my career, in my personal life. I had just gotten married. And unbeknownst to me, this was the beginning of the first dot-com bubble bursting. So very unexpectedly, I was called into a conference room and told that the client was cutting their budget and the agency had to cut staff and that I needed to clean out my desk. That was really, really difficult for me to process. It caught me totally off guard. I had bought into the myth of meritocracy, meaning, if you work hard enough, you'll be met with success.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I was met with a layoff, and that I just had a very difficult time processing that. I had put a lot of my self worth and my self identity into what I did. And when I was left without that, I found myself somewhat empty. It took me a very long time to process that and recover. Fast forward, my fourth layoff, summer of 2023, and I sailed right through it. It was like water off a duck's back. What I realized upon reflection was that I had learned a set of skills to navigate and manage the grief of a layoff in a way where it didn't take me any time at all to get through it because I knew how to properly manage and place those emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I no longer put my entire being and self into what I did. My identity wasn't wrapped up in what it said on my business card. I had become a much more kind of well-rounded person with much better self-care practices, which gave me a
Mm-hmm.
great baseline to manage that grief from. To tie this back to the book, I was laid off in that fourth time with about 20% of the company. There were some very young people in the company. Some, it was their second time being laid off that
Wow.
year. I found I wanted to pull them aside and tell them it was going to be okay. And here's how I learned how to manage that grief. Here's how I learned how to kind of use that time that a layoff presents as a pause to reset and maybe find some resilience and perhaps a
Yeah.
pivot, or maybe it's a recommitment to your career path. But
Mm-hmm.
either way, to do some kind of introspection and self-examination and give yourself the time to grieve.
Yeah.
I then realized, well, if I were to turn this into a book, I could help much more than just the 20% of that company. I could help so many more people. It happened to be that I was looking for the subject of a book, and I always wanted to write a book, and kind of serendipity took hold, and everything now is history. And here I am.
Yeah, that's great. So I know a couple people in my old team who were laid off this week. I just wanted to jump into help mode and give them all this advice that I've learned in the past year. I also didn't want to overstep.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to feel all the feels that they're feeling, all the
Hmm.
things you talk about. It is a loss, it is grieving. They're still very much in the shock of it all. But the real test is going to come on Monday morning when you lose that routine
Yeah.
and you don't know what to do with yourself. Because that was something that I was totally not expecting when
Hmm.
I was laid off. What do I do on a Monday morning when I don't have access to my computer anymore,
Right.
checking my email, being in meetings, and carrying on? What do I do? So I didn't want, I provided as much advice as I could, but within reason. Was there anything throughout any of your layoffs that surprised you the most?
I think it was the shame and embarrassment of a
Mm,
layoff is really difficult. That's a real burden that people carry. The thing that I'm struck with is a layoff is a no fault termination. So it's not like you were fired. It's not like you did
mhm.
something wrong. You were kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. The company is going through a budget exercise because they're faced with some financial headwinds. The
Yep.
quickest way to drive revenue to the bottom line is to reduce headcount. So, you may have been a high performer, like back to that myth of meritocracy. I've seen employee of the year in January get laid off in July when the company's faced with budget cuts. All bets are off, employee of the year included. That shame and embarrassment, like letting go of that, is really important to
Mhm.
moving on and moving through this process because
Yeah.
you did nothing wrong, right? That's kind of the key to unlocking a lot of this because one of the things that you're going to need to do, like you mentioned, routine, you're going to need to replace your old routine. You're
Yep.
also going to need to find a new community because those work colleagues, those were friends, those were people you were in the foxhole with every day that, like you said, Monday morning, typically when you're going through difficulty at work, you would turn to them and you would commiserate and you give each other advice about how to
Yeah.
manage a work situation. Well, you're now managing this work situation without those friends, right? So you need to find a new community. And if you're afraid to talk about it because of the shame and embarrassment, you're
Yeah.
really not going to be able to get the most out of a community. About 40% of all Americans have been laid off at least once in their career, but not as many people talk about it. So if you start talking about it and sharing with people, you're going to find I'd probably be surprised how many people have also been through a layoff, especially today. They're
Oh, yeah.
almost ubiquitous. Reaching out for support and talking about it with people is really important and letting go of that shame and embarrassment.
W- Going back to the question of what surprised me, I was surprised by the loneliness. You talk
Mm,
about how people don't talk about it enough,
mhm,
even though
mhm.
it's all over the news. I was the only one in my close friends group last year that got laid off. I was completely lonely because I didn't expect them to know how I was feeling. And then realizing that the people some people, not all, but some people you thought would be helpful or in your corner or check up on you didn't do that. Did you experience any of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. Some people that I thought I was really close to, you don't really hear back from. And then there was always some people who I didn't think I was that close to who reached out and would
Yeah.
offer all these really kind and supportive
Yes,
words. And I thought, God, I never knew you felt that way.
I know.
So they would kind of counterbalance each other. But yeah, and I've heard that from other people too that I've been talking to on this book tour. That surprise of who doesn't reach out and who does, it can be off-putting because in a way you kind of find out maybe who your friends really were,
Yeah.
and who you could really rely on.
Mm,
There's so much that's taken away. You
mhm.
don't just lose your paycheck and your health insurance. You lose your community. You lose that routine. You lose friends and colleagues. It's just an abundance of loss.
I agree. And you also talk about, and you mentioned before, the identity piece of it all tied
Yeah,
to your job title.
right,
And last year, when I was unemployed, I would meet up parents all the time during sports events. And if I'm meeting one of them for the first time, one of the first questions is, what do you do?
right, exactly. What do you do?
I hated that
Right,
questions because there was such embarrassment to
right.
saying, "Oh, I was laid off."
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
they don't expect that answer from you. So
Right. Right.
so it goes back to you shouldn't have your identity wrapped up in your job. After a layoff, I learned that to not be so tied to a job title. Can you
Right.
talk a little bit about that in your book?
Yeah, I think the important thing is like if somebody asks you what you do, like for me, for example, I was in
Mhm.
marketing for 25 years. I worked in ad agencies. It's easy to say, I work for this company and this is my title, right? But if you allow yourself to kind of transcend that and say, oh, what do you do for a living? I'm a marketing executive with 25 years of experience working at ad agencies,
Yeah.
right? I take that with me wherever I go, and any employer can't take that from me. I'm not tied to a job that I have and that title. And what's great about that is then when you re-enter the job market and you start interviewing for jobs, you talk about yourself and the skills inherent and inalienable to you. So I wasn't a VP of marketing at Kellogg's. I'm a VP of marketing with 25 years of experience leading brands to, success or something. Then you kind of jump right over the layoff and then also if you're out of work, how do you answer that question? Well, you still have all of that experience. You still have all of those talents. You don't reduce yourself to that one isolated moment in time. That's one of the hard things about getting laid off around the holidays is now you're suddenly going to be put into all of those social settings with friends and family. It just is a great thing to learn how to reposition.
It also helps you, like you said, for future job interviews that I hated the question of tell me about yourself because I never
Right,
really knew how to answer it, but it prepares you in a way to answer that question.
right, right.
In your book, you talk about the different grief stages. You have denial, pain, negotiation, depression, acceptance, reconstruction, and renewal.
Hmm.
What stage do you think people may get stuck in given the job market and why?
Yeah. The thing about these stages of grief are that they're not linear. You don't necessarily go through them one by one.
Hmm.
You may not experience any of them in one day, and you may experience all of them in one day. They're kind of unique to everyone's life experience. So there might be one that hangs somebody up more than others. For me, depression was really hard. I didn't realize I had a propensity for depression, and the first layoff kind of ignited that, and it was something that I then had to really learn how to overcome. I do think that this week, as layoffs are happening and they're really fresh, the denial stage, that shock of, oh my gosh, how is this happening? Why is this happening? Like, I don't understand. This just doesn't seem or feel real.
Hmm.
That is very real. The anger of like, okay, wait a minute. Especially today when these companies like, let's say Amazon are laying people off. Meanwhile, they're announcing record profits.
Yep.
It feels like there's a lot of inequity. Like the people at the top are doing extremely well, and the people that are making it all happen are expendable. That's really difficult to reconcile. You have to kind of pull yourself out from that. But those are very real and kind of the most immediate things you feel after your layoff, that
Yeah.
denial and anger.
Yeah, for sure. You talked about your first layoff,
Mhm.
how it was shocking. If you could go back and tell that version of Steve one thing, what would it be?
This is just a chapter. This isn't your whole book. This isn't your whole story.
Mhm.
This is just a detour along the path. This too shall pass. It feels like this declarative statement on who you are as a person, as an employee, as a worker. All of your value feels wrapped up in this decision that somebody is letting you go. You feel kind of like thrown away.
Yep.
And the understanding that don't let their decision affect your self-worth, that perspective would have helped me a lot. I felt like this was this declarative statement on me as a person. Really, the client cut their budget. They had no way to pay the people on the team. They had to
Mhm.
let us go. But in the moment and moments that followed, I couldn't rationalize that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Now, after 4 layoffs, I'm sure you define success and boundaries differently. How do you define success differently now because of all the things you went through?
Yeah, my version of success now is rooted in how many people can I help? And this book is one of those ways that I'm really trying to help people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer in that Maya Angelou statement of how do people feel after you've left the room. I want to leave a positive, lasting impression. Don't feel like maybe I necessarily did that in my younger years. I was much more wrapped up in myself and how I could benefit and job titles and prestige of companies or accounts that I worked on. And I find much more fulfillment now in trying to help people.
Perfect. For someone listening who just got laid off this week and is in the denial or the pain stage, what advice would you give them?
Give yourself the permission to feel angry. It's normal, but don't let it consume you. Find an outlet for it. Go to the gym, take up kickboxing, do something productive. On Monday morning, when you're left with that hole in your routine, fill it with something productive. Get out, exercise, move your body, find an outlet. Maybe it's sewing, it's cooking, it's dancing, it's journaling, it's listening to music.
Mm-hmm.
Channel the anger productively and don't ignore it and don't minimize it. What you're going through is a difficult time. The stages of grief are real and it's normal.
I agree. I channeled my grief into running. So I ran, and every month I set a new goal for myself. I'm going to get to 5 miles this month, or I'm going to get to 10. It's become my outlet. And it really became part of me during my layoff period, because that's where I channeled all my energy. And I would just think on those runs. And sometimes I'll be sad when a song comes on, and that was okay. And I had to be okay with sometimes being not okay. So last question, Steve, what is next for you? More writing, more speaking, vacation maybe?
Probably another book. I haven't decided exactly. Probably another book. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you would like to leave us with before we sign off today?
I hope people who've heard this feel like there's support. And if you want to learn more, if you want to learn more about my book and me, you can go to thestevejaffe.com. You can find the book on Amazon. Just type in The Layoff Journey. We can connect on LinkedIn and on Instagram. I've got a blog on Substack. So there's plenty of ways to connect, get content, find resources, and get help.
I will link all of that stuff in the description. So thank you, Steve. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So thank you to Steve for being on the podcast. Please go check out his book. It is a great blueprint on talking about the different stages of grief that comes from a layoff. It gives practical advice on how to cope with these different stages of grief. You're more than just a job title. There's no shame or embarrassment in a layoff situation, but it's what you do with it, how you react, and you will rise from it in a better situation. You might have a moment of clarity on what you want to do next. Your boundaries and values will change, and that's okay. So whether you're listening on a walk, in the car, or just trying to get through your day, I hope these stories give you a little spark of inspiration and hope. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you.